This is the Puck Poolies podcast with Matt Larkin and Stephen Ellis.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Puck Poolies. It's Matt Larkin here with Stephen Ellis talking fantasy hockey. As always, hard to believe we are at episode 31. I can't even picture us doing this 30 times already, but apparently we have. Stephen, how you doing, my friend? And I wanted to ask you, how many hockey games have you seen this year before it's even October 1st?
I was doing the math last night when I was at the Leafs Senators preseason game. I think I'm actually at 12, and that's going to be going up quite a bit this weekend with the start of the OHL season coming back. I'm looking forward to that, and I was very tempted to go to Buffalo again later this week for the OJHL Governor Showcase, and if we count all those as individual games, that could have been an extra like 25. I'm not going to count those, but yeah, no, it's good to be going back, and you haven't been in a rink in a while, but I'm guessing you kind of want to be.
Well, I've been in a practice rink. I have been in the Toronto Maple Leafs practice rink, but I am admittedly like this is just a thing, and I always feel bad saying this as a hockey reporter. I sound unappreciative, but I'm a preseason snob. It really bores me, and I don't like going to preseason games. I have to admit it. The stakes are too low, and there's such a long grind of 6 months of hockey ahead. 7 months. No, it's more than that. It's 8 months. It's 8 months of the NHL season ahead, right? So I just can't do it. I just can't do the preseason.
I don't blame you. And looking at the crowd last night, 14,000 people, tickets are pretty cheap, so I get it. But the one thing is this is my time to see these guys you won't see again in a jersey. And for someone who cares about hockey photography, it's the one time we might get a picture of one of these guys playing in their jerseys, which is really nice. Although, with all due respect to Ottawa and all due respect to Montreal, because again, Toronto's our local team here. Those teams playing Montreal or playing the Leafs like a combined like 33 times in the preseason. I've already seen their prospects 1,000 times at the prospect showcase. I'm okay, literally not seeing some of those guys again. Again, all due respect to Zach Ostapchuk, I want to see some new players now.
Mm-hmm. But Stephen Ellis, everybody, jack of all trades. He takes lots of photos, and they're in our database when we're writing articles. There are just tons of photos that were just snapped by Stephen.
I took a picture of Brock Caulfield, and I posted on Twitter, and it was like one of the biggest tweets I've ever had. And the Steve Dangle podcast did the first like 20 minutes talking about it. Like, it was kind of funny. It was just like people, like it's good to have those pictures if you ever need them, because there's been a lot of times where like, oh, this random nobody just signed, we need a picture. It's like, I have it. He played one game with the Rockford Ice Hogs last year when they came up here, and I saw it.
That's right. That's your trademark, my friend. Okay, so we're obviously still in fantasy draft prep season. I'm in the middle of doing an expert league draft right now. It's a slow draft. You can find my recaps of each round on Daily Faceoff. There's rounds 1 to 3 are on there right now. My main draft is not until next week, but we know it's draft prep season, so we're going to continue with some special segments that are geared toward helping you make those picks. So what do we have to start the show, Stephen?
Well, this is going to be a goalie-focused episode, and I love it because goalies are my favorite position, and I think I value goalies a lot more in fantasy hockey than the average person, and partly because they really helped me win my league last year. But let's start with the elite goalies, the best of the best, the guys that, if everything goes right, should be challenging for the Vezina Trophy.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. So these are tiered rankings. I wanted to just give you an idea of the reason why tiers are important, because they can help you make a decision when you're trying to decide whether to pick a player. And if there are several players left in this tier, you can probably wait until your next turn in the draft. But if you see a notable drop-off after this pick, okay, there's only one guy left in this tier, that's when you know it's time to pounce. So tier 1, the elite, Ilya Sorokin, Jake Ottinger, Andrei Vasilevsky, Igor Shesterkin. To me, these goaltenders, these 4, they check all the boxes. You know you're going to get great rate stats from them. They're going to get great volume too. They are all in their primes, and they're on playoff teams that are legitimate contenders, or at least want to be legitimate contenders. So you get a little bit of everything, and I'd say each of those guys has a floor of 30 wins and maybe a .915 save percentage. So these are the best of the best, and they are all major Vezina Trophy contenders.
Yeah. So when you got Ilya Sorokin, you got Jake Ottinger, you got Vasilevsky, you got Shesterkin, like, you can't go wrong with those goalies.
Not at all. Exactly. They're just the the true bell cows, the true studs. They're guys that could be worth as much as a first round value in terms of a skater. The only problem is you never know which goaltender is going to be the one who returns first round value. So that's why you can't necessarily pick them in the first round. But I think in the second round, I would give my blessing to pick any of those four. So the next tier we have is, I call this the excellent number ones. If you have one of these as your starting goaltender, your number one, you're still in great shape. I think each of these goalies, they're good enough to still win the Vezina Trophy if everything breaks their way. So that's Connor Hellebuyck, Alexander Georgiev, Linus Ullmark, UC Saros, Thatcher Demko. So I consider all these goaltenders to have a ton of upside, probably as much upside as the goalies in the tier above. But I'd say each one of these guys has one question mark. So if it's Saros and Hellebuyck, are they going to get you enough wins on teams that are kind of headed downward? Linus Ullmark, Alexander Georgiev, can they do it again? They came out of nowhere for monster seasons last year, but are we confident they can repeat it? Thatcher Demko, can he stay healthy? So all these goaltenders are great. I think you're fine if they're your number one, but they're a tier down from the top because they do have that one question mark for each guy.
I like that one. All right, going to the low end goal number ones. These are guys that, you got a Stanley Cup champion in here. You've got a guy who was a great rookie last year. You got someone who's very good if he could stay healthy, and you got someone who needs to bounce back in a big way.
Yeah, so the low end G1s, I have Darcy Kemper, Stuart Skinner, Tristan Jarry, and Jacob Markstrom. So depending on your league configuration, there might be some goalies in the next tier down that you rank higher. But if you're looking for volume, I like all four of these goalies to play a lot. And at the same time, I think it's a shaky situation if you're relying on any of these guys as your number one because they have some warts to worry about. Darcy Kemper playing on a Capitals team that's going in the wrong direction. Stuart Skinner pulled 4 times in the playoffs. He still has to fight off Jack Campbell in Edmonton. Tristan Jarry is always hurt. Jacob Markstrom is coming off a bad season. At the same time, I think any of these guys can end up in the top 10 fantasy-wise this year because they have track records of previous success. Not so much Skinner, but he was good last year for the most part. And I think they're all going to play enough. They're going to be starting minimum 50 games apiece. So the volume will be there. I think if any of these guys are your number two, you're in great shape. Number one, you better get a good number two to pair with them.
Yep. It'd be interesting, I think, when we look back at what Darcy Kemper's, obviously he's got a few more years in his career, but we look back and you say, what is going to be his legacy? When a guy that, when he was good, he could be very good. There were times where we're talking about him being like a very sleeper Vezina candidate guy, but then there'd be enough years of injuries, down years. You don't know what you're going to get. And again, I've made a joke on Twitter once that people took too seriously. Darcy Kemper was the starting goalie at the World Championship 2021. Whatever year was that, he won the Stanley Cup or won the World Championship, then wins the Stanley Cup the next year. Then you look at Aiden Hill, he wins the World Championship, wins the Stanley Cup. Samuel Montembeault, starting goalie, Montreal Canadiens. Congratulations, you guys won the Stanley Cup. Again, not actually real. This is the fourth tier, rate stats, but volume concerns. So these are guys that could be good, but might not play a ton.
Yes, so this tier, I actually like these goalies better than the goalies in the tier above, but most fantasy hockey configurations, they really favor volume categories like wins and shutouts. If your league configuration awards more points or weights the categories of goals against average and save percentage higher, I think I would bump up all four of these guys. So I have Philip Gustafsson, Ilya Samsonov, Aiden Hill, and Frederik Andersen. So all of them are going to be very above average in at least goals against average because they all play on teams that are good defensively. I think Freddie Andersen's save percentage dipped, so maybe it's not going to be great save percentage, but he's going to get the goals against average. Philip Gustafsson was the second best goalie in the world last year, other than Linus Ullmark. Samsonov quietly was a top 10 fantasy goalie in the regular season. Aiden Hill has consistently had good rate stats throughout his career, and he was amazing in the playoffs. So the only problem is I think all four of these guys have threats to their playing time. Philip Gustafsson still has to share the net with Marc-Andre Fleury. Ilya Samsonov has Joseph Woll breathing down his neck. Aiden Hill has to contend with Logan Thompson. Frederik Andersen has to go up against Antti Raanta and Piotr Kochetkov. So I really like what most of these goalies bring to the table. But sorry, Steven, I just had an Adobe window pop up here that blocked my ability to see the camera. Stupid nice. Adobe. Anyways, sorry, Adobe. I guess you're not going to be our sponsor anytime soon. But yes, so what I'm saying is I lost my train of thought for a second there, but each of these goaltenders, great rate stats. If you have a shakier number one that has high volume, you can pair them with one of these guys to help your rate stats.
One thing I want to say, I'm a big believer in Freddie Anderson. If he stays healthy, we know what he could do. When it comes to Samsonov, compared to last year where he was 1A, 1B with Matt Murray, and Matt Murray seemed to have the slight edge given kind of his career workload and everything and the salary too. Now Murray's not there. You've got Joseph Woll, who's this young guy trying to push through, but I think this is probably the best shot in Samsonov's career to be a number one. The issue is you've got a very good number two who could take over, and they signed a third goalie who admittedly looks pretty good in his first preseason game of Martin Jones. But that is also a meaningless preseason game against Ottawa that sat most of their good players. So who knows? Tier 5, volume but rate stats concerns. These guys going to play a lot, but might not get you the best stats.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like all three of these goalies in this tier 5, are on teams that are trying to make the playoffs or stay in the playoffs. They all have upside to be very good fantasy goalies, top 10 fantasy goalies, but they all could even lose their jobs. Like their range of outcomes is really wide. So you have Vitek Vanacek, New Jersey Devils, was quite a valuable fantasy goalie. He spent much of last year around the top 6, but then he lost his job to Akira Schmidt in the playoffs. And going into the season, it's going to be probably a battle between the two. So Vanacek could turn you a huge profit, or he could end up being a backup by the middle of the season. Sergei Bobrovsky, obviously his value is going to be inflated from that amazing playoff run, but you have to remember, before the playoffs, he was pretty bad. Lost his job to the third string, not the second string, the third stringer, Alex Lyon. You have Anthony Stolarz, who's been signed. You have Spencer Knight trying to work his way back from the player assistance program. So you have competition for Bobrovsky, and he was great for 3 rounds. He was bad in the Stanley Cup final. He was bad before the playoffs. The sample size of being bad was a lot bigger than being good last year for Bobrovsky, so there is a risk with having him as your starting goalie. And the last one I have is Joonas Korpisalo. Very wide range of outcomes with him. Obviously, Ottawa's paying him to be the number one, so he's going to get a decent amount of runway. But his sample size in his career, he's had quite the roller coaster, right? He's had a lot of bad years. Obviously, some of it was because of a hip problem. He did get that fixed a year ago, and it led to probably his best overall season wire to wire with Columbus, then coming over to LA at the trade deadline was really good for them until the playoffs. Wasn't so good in the playoffs. But overall, with Korpisalo, I think he sometimes dines out on the reputation of that one series he played against the Leafs, and he had one good year last year, but you really don't know what you're getting. You're going to an Ottawa team that's still working on its defensive play, so there's some downside for Korpisalo. So in each case, right now, all three of these guys, they have volume on paper. They're certainly draftable, but there is as much downside as there is upside.
Will Bobrovsky be the starting goalie come playoff time?
That's the question. I'm not convinced that he will. And I know that it was a point of frustration for the franchise throughout last year when they were struggling to get into the playoff picture early on because they were pretty unlucky statistically and they just couldn't get a save until finally the playoffs. So even though Bobrovsky was so good, I don't know if that leash is as long as it might seem in Florida.
And this one, backups with varying upside, and you're looking at them now. I guess you're looking at backup on your own team, correct?
Yes, correct. Not backups in real life, just fantasy backups. So I feel like you want to get one of these guys to stash on your bench because they all have potential to turn you a major profit later. So this tier is Jeremy Swayman, Cam Talbot, Devin Levi, Billy Husso, and Carter Hart. To me, again, it depends on your league configuration. A lot of fantasy formats would have Jeremy Swayman far higher in the rankings because obviously if you base your stat categories on rate stats, he's going to be worth a lot more and you don't need that volume. But he's still a timeshare goalie. He's still a guy right now who's slated for 35 starts. I'm personally always chasing volume with my goalies, so that's why I have Jeremy Swayman lower than a lot of people probably do. And I would describe the goalies in this tier, they don't have all the same characteristics. This is sort of a bargain bin of depending on what you're looking for, but all have some upside. Cam Talbot, on a Kings team that looks pretty good this year, if he can hold off Phoenix Copley, that can be a really valuable goaltender on a good defensive team that you might be able to get as your third goalie, and suddenly he actually delivers top 10 value. Devin Levi, of course, we know the upside is enormous. If he can stick, we know the team wants him to win that job. He doesn't have to win it, but if he does, we know that the Buffalo Sabres they sort of feel like the rocket ship team this year that's going to explode. We're going to talk about them a little more later on the show. So, of course, if you knew that Devin Levi was going to win the job, he's going to be massively valuable this year. Billy Husso, again, depends on your faith in Detroit's rebuild. If you think they're ready to make a surge, he's the starter. So maybe he's going to be more valuable this year. I'm not personally a believer in Detroit. Doesn't look like Steven is either. I see him shaking his head. Yeah, I don't think Detroit's going to do it. But again, if you believe, then Billy Husso could return value. Carter Hart, a wild card. On John Tortorella coached teams, he doesn't get completely hung out to dry, as he showed you last year. And if Carter Hart gets traded mid-season, he could land in a situation where he becomes extremely valuable. So he's someone maybe to stash on your bench. Maybe you're not going to start him during the season, but he's a decent person to have stashed away in case his situation changes. So that's tier 6.
That is a ton of value. That's 6 tier. So I guess we could stop talking about goalies for a little bit, which is too sad because goalies are my favorite position. But let's talk about training camp and kind of everything going on in the preseason. You know, we've had a few games for each team now at this point. Training camp's been up for just under a week now. So which training camp storyline do you think is most fantasy relevant so far?
Yeah, I figured let's each overreact to something. Obviously, not everything you see in training camp is going to matter, but there will be some actionable items. And the one I have my eye on is John Klingberg getting that PP1 spot with the Toronto Maple Leafs. That was always going to be the thing in fantasy with John Klingberg. If he gets a shot to replace Morgan Riley, it's extremely important information for fantasy. And of course, yes, John Klingberg, his overall game has slipped a lot in the last couple of seasons, especially defensively. But even just if you look at the last 2 years, which would be considered his decline, 88 defensemen have played 100 minutes or more on the power play. He's 13th in primary assists per 60 minutes. So he can still move the puck. He's still a very good power play quarterback. He's more of a threat with his shot than Morgan Riley is, I would argue as well. So if you have him out there with Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, that's exciting. The Leafs have been a top 2 power play in the NHL 2 years running. Yes, they've lost Spencer Carberry, the mastermind, but they still have the personnel that he helped sort of hone into a well-oiled power play machine. So I don't think they're suddenly going to be a bad power play. They're still going to be well above average. And this is an exciting situation for Klingberg. The other actionable item is this is a big hit to Morgan Riley's fantasy value. He's someone who struggled through a lot of last season, and he's no longer much of a threat these days as a goal scorer from the point. And if he's not out there in the power play, he's going to lose a lot of points. So John Klingberg is going to jump a ton in fantasy value if he keeps this job. Morgan Riley slides a lot.
I will say that, again, we're talking on one preseason game, but man, Klingberg looked bad against Ottawa on Monday night. He looked bad. That was like bringing memories of who were number 3 last year for Justin Hall.
I predicted that he's going to be the next Jake Gardiner or Dustin Hall. It's not going to be pretty on defense.
You know, when you look at Klingberg, he had a lot to prove last year. He was on that 1-year prove me deal, and he hurt his own value for sure. Let's see what he could do this year. For me, the training camp battle that I guess training camp storyline that was most interested to me, and this will not come as a shock at all, but it's who is going to play with Connor Bedard in Chicago, and it looks like Tyler Johnson is going to be the guy that they're going to be going with, and that one's really interesting. You know, he had 32 points last year, but if you look at a full season, because he only played 56 games, we're looking at a guy who could hit 50 points last year. When it comes to the Blackhawks, they had a couple guys last year that looked probably much better than they would have been on other teams, just given the situation of that group. But Tyler Johnson, you know, is not a spring chicken anymore. He's 33 years old. It feels like quite a while ago that we were talking about how good he was as a small player. He was kind of the model, 5'8" player that you really want a guy to turn into if they're that big or that small. But 72 points in 2014-15, and he's had 150 point season since then. So offense has been hard to come by, but we know he's got the skill. We know he can move his legs, and if he's healthy, he could still be a valuable offensive contributor. You throw him on a line of Taylor Hall and Connor Bedard, and that is maybe the best line he's ever played on in his career. So this is a good chance for him to be this good guy, good value guy that might not be too high in some pools because the fact he hasn't put up a ton of points. And yeah, again, he had 32 points last year. He had 7 the year before. He had 22 the year before that and 31 the year before that. And the issue is he hasn't hit the 70 game mark since 2018-19. So if he stays healthy, we know he could put up points. Staying healthy is the concern. But the fact that he's starting this preseason right now and starting training camp with Connor Bedard, I think has to get you pretty excited about what he could do.
Yeah, I think that's a bang-on assessment, and I did an update of my top 300 fantasy rankings last Friday, and I did move Tyler Johnson up. He was on the bubble, and now I moved him into roughly the top 275. So I think absolutely he's draftable now. I would still bid carefully just because of, like you said, Steven's health risks, and we just don't know how long on that line, but I think in a deep league, you want to draft him with a late pick, and maybe even in a medium league, he's an early season waiver ad as well.
Yep. So again, you tread carefully there, but If you're in a really deep league and you get the space, you could do a lot worse than guys playing with Connor Bedard. But we'll have to see what happens there. All right. Before we go into our guest, it is time for the tip of the week, and you are going with going best available. Depends on how active your league is. Now, this is interesting because I have no idea what you're going to say.
Yeah, for sure. So even when I read the headline, I was like, this really seems vague, but it's kind of fun, right? So we are in draft season, and obviously a common piece of advice that you'll read and you'll receive, even from me, from different people in fantasy circles, is go best available, especially early in the draft. Just go for talent, talent, talent. And that usually is the case. But I will say the best available strategy, it depends on two things: your league configuration and the people you're playing with. So if you play in the league that has limits on trading, or one of the leagues where you just draft a team and you don't touch your team, best available is risky, because then you could be leaving a position unmanned. Or, let's say you try to go zero goalie. Well, you can't make any pickups in the season, so you're stuck with some bad goalies and you can't make any tweaks to that the entire season long. So in that kind of format where you can't touch your team very much, I think you want to actually pay attention and break some ties with your positional need. The same thing applies if you're in a league that's just sort of, a dud league, or a league where people are scared of trading. You have to be mindful of that too when you're trying to fill out a position, because I play in a league, for example, that's extremely active. My main league I'm talking about. So I can go best available because I think, oh, okay, well, I need to shore up my defense later. I can talk to one of the 15 people that are super active in this league and I'll work out a trade. Throughout the season, I can do this over and over because people love to play the game and engage. But if you're in a league that's pretty casual and you don't have that level of engagement, you're probably going to be kind of stuck with what you have. And in that case, you don't want to leave major holes in your roster coming out of the draft. You want to make sure you pay attention to every position. So just in summary, pay attention to the style of league and who you're playing with.
Okay, I like that. It's time for our guest, and it's a returning guest.
It is. We're very happy to bring back our buddy Dom Luszczyszyn to talk, of course, fantasy hockey, but also his favorite, Taylor Swift. Okay, we are very pleased to bring back one of our pals, going back to our hockey news days on the show, our buddy from The Athletic, national NHL writer Dom Luszczyszyn. Dom, it's great to have you back, and I feel like this is a big moment. In my mind, it's a big moment for you because I think you were the original Swiftie among hockey reporters, and now, just with the way things are blowing up, you're ahead of your time. We are going to get to Taylor Swift eventually, but first, just how are you doing, my friend?
Not too bad. I actually saw Taylor Swift, saw the Eras Tour in Pittsburgh this summer, so definitely a highlight of my entire life because of how close I was. I somehow managed to get front row right at the Diamond, and it was incredible. She was right there. She was like 5 feet away from me, and she became a real person then. I don't know if I was the original Swiftie. I know Sarah Sivian has been in her corner for a while. Sarah met Taylor Swift at the Reputation Tour, so she definitely gets some credit there. Alison Lukin as well, big Swiftie. A lot of Swifties, but it's definitely become more popular for sure.
For sure. It's crazy to think, even just the seat that you had for that show, I feel like even just months later, that would be worth about, I don't know, $90,000. So Dom, let's talk a little fantasy first, okay? Before we get to the good stuff. So I'm curious for you because you're someone who I think you're known for your conviction. You have strong opinions backed up by a lot of research, and you stick to them, and you're willing to dig your heels in and say X or Y about a certain player. So is there anyone last season that changed your mind and surprised you? And are you now in that player's corner and actively trying to draft them?
Yeah, I don't know if conviction is the right way to put it, in the sense that I go what you mean, where if a player is not good right now, I will be not afraid to say it. But I feel like my mind is a bit more malleable, where if I come into new information, I'll be like, okay, yes, my mind has changed. I've seen enough. I've been convinced. And I think the best example of that is obviously Tage Thompson, who last year going into the season, the vibes were good, but I probably wouldn't have touched him because he looked like a surefire regression candidate. He has never shown that level of scoring before. On ice shooting percentage wasn't something that looked sustainable, but Tage is Tage. The vibes are immaculate, and now he looks like a surefire, like top 20 fantasy player. And I have zero doubts about him in that way. Just the way he does things is so unique and special, and what a player.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to find a guy like him in the NHL today. So let's say you're starting your own fantasy league today. What is the ideal league configuration for your own fantasy league?
It is not the standard fantasy league, which I despise, and I think it's the reason why a lot of people do their own thing and change things up. I've had a fantasy league with my buddies since like high school, and we've always been tweaking it, but we've had this one format for the last, I think, 7 or so years, and I think it works really well. We used to be a points league, so whoever had the most points in year won, and that became really boring after probably December. Usually the top guy like ran away with it. That's the annoying part. So head to head was the way. We changed that, but we stuck with points rather than categories. I think categories in hockey is a terrible way to do things. I think it makes categories that shouldn't be equal. I think the standardized ones have hits. Do they have hits?
I don't know if standardized, but maybe they do these days. Yeah.
Blocks, plus minus, hits, all these trash categories that should not be equal to goals and assists. And it makes players like Brady Tkachuk top 10 fantasy players when he's really good now, but to be this category monster, it doesn't make sense. And I think with points, you can weight things based on how important they are. So goals and assists naturally should be worth more than a hit, worth more than plus minus, worth more than a shot even. The other thing is that in standardized points leagues, they have goals worth more than assists, which is not something I generally agree with. So that's one change that I made in my own league, where goals and assists are equal and playmakers aren't slighted just because they put the puck on someone's stick rather than in the net. But those are the two major things. And the way to keep it simple in my league is that anything important is worth 3 and everything that is sort of less is 0.5. So goals, assists, wins, goals against are 3. Goals against would be -3 for goalies, obviously. And then shots and saves are 0.5. And it works out pretty good. The goalies are a little volatile from game to game, but like it works out. And that's sort of the appeal, is that there is a bit of random variation where a lesser team does have a chance if it comes down to goaltending.
Okay, that's a pretty interesting configuration. I can see the logic, because I'm all for trying to create systems that accurately represent real life. So in fantasy football, I play in a league that's super flex, and we have 6 points for passing touchdowns because we want Patrick Mahomes to be the top scoring player. We want Josh Allen to be the second. Like, they are the 2 best football players in the world, give or take, right? So I definitely agree with the philosophy.
You said super flex, and it immediately reminded me of the most important thing in my league. Super flex, you can have 2 quarterbacks. Is that correct?
Correct. And you can start 2 quarterbacks at once.
Absolute insanity to me. Not real. Complete fantasy land. And it is the number one problem I have with standard leagues is starting 2 goalies. I think it's so ludicrous because that would never, ever happen. So we have 1 starting goalie slot. It decreases the importance of goalies. I think in normal leagues, they usually, like, there's a run in the second round, you need your starter or whatever. And because of how random they are, your entire draft can fall apart just because you don't have goaltending and you maybe wasted a slot in the second round. 1 goalie just makes sense with how hockey has always been played. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's ever been a time where 2 goalies were just hanging out in net and stopping pucks together. And
that Fairley Brothers movie stuck on you. That would be the only time.
That'd be it, right? And I think with how teams are going to tandems, the platoons, and not having these workhorse starters, it makes sense to only have 1 guy for fantasy, because the pool of elite guys is so thin that if you're on a 12-team league, you're rostering 24 goalies, there probably aren't like 15 goalies worth starting night to night.
Yeah, I can see the logic. I skew the other way. I still think if you start 1 with quarterbacks and goalies, you totally devalue the position. But I can see the logic for sure. I wanted to ask you about the idea of your guy. So for me, it's like, for example, in fantasy drafts this year, I'm trying to get Evan Bouchard everywhere. I think he's just going to go to the moon. I'm curious, do you have someone that you're targeting right now that you just feel like you need to get in every draft that you do?
I want to preface this by saying that I never prepare for a podcast ever, but I looked at your questions like, oh, I got to prepare for this. This is the one question I didn't have to at all. Evan Bouchard is the guy. I think he is so underdrafted right now. We saw what Tyson Barrie did for the Edmonton Oilers power play. Evan Bouchard is a lot better, and he showed that as soon as he got the starting power play 1 job last season. I think he had 36 points in 33 games between the regular season and playoffs, and it seems like they're going to dial up his minutes at 5-on-5. This is going to be his breakout season, and like I think 60 points is like genuinely his floor on that power play. That power play is absolutely disgusting. Because you said Bouchard, I'm going to throw out some other names because I feel like that's the obvious one. I think it's really hard in general to find a defenseman that can play power play 1 and actually put up points. I think that's what makes them so underdrafted and difficult to get. So I think finding a sleeper there is good, and I like the Ducks options where I don't think Camp Bauer is very good, and I think they have 2 rookies who might steal that job, and Olin Zellweger and Pavel Mintyukov. Whoever makes a team, I generally think could steal that job, and then you can probably get him with your last pick or whatever. And aside from them, I think Carter Verhaeghe and Brandon Hagel didn't get a lot of power play time last season and still productive this season. They should be on power play 1. Those are good guys to get. I have none of them in my league. I got Zellweger off waivers, but the other ones I didn't get.
Oh, Zellweger's going to pay off very well one day. I'm very confident in him. All right, so those are guys that are more underrated players. Let's talk about a top 100 player that you were avoiding like the plague this year. We've had Mark Stone's name thrown around. I'm assuming that's maybe your pick, but what would you choose?
That is one of them. The first note I put was most goalies, but especially Linus Ullmark.
Yes. Yeah.
So Boston's going to be much worse this year. You have Jeremy Swayman probably stealing starts. You had Ullmark not even playing 50 games last year to begin with, and I think he's like the 30th goalie or something. Again, a flaw with the 2 goalie system is you're overdrafting a guy like Ullmark. I don't know if this is still the case, but I saw Marc-Andre Fleury at one point was top 100 ADP. Sure, absolutely. Why not? And these are the problems with the 2 goalie system. And even in those leagues, you're doing yourself a disservice drafting Ullmark that high and Fleury probably at all. But aside from that, I think other than Stone, the big one for me is Tyler Toffoli. I think a lot of people are really high on him because he's going to the Devils. He's going to play with Jack Hughes. That's all very exciting. I don't think he sniffs power play 1, and I think that is a huge detriment to his overall scoring ability, especially if you're in a league where power play points are a category and matter. Like, he's going to be great at 5-on-5, great in that way. I think he's maybe 6th or 7th on the power play depth chart, and that should hurt his production a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. You've taken me on a roller coaster because one of my keepers is Carter Verhaeghe, and one of my keepers is Tyler Toffoli. Oh, so I don't know how to feel.
How many keepers do you have?
In my league, it's depending on how far you go. So if you make the final or better, you get 2 keepers. If you make the playoffs, you get 3, and if you miss the playoffs, you get 4. But I went for it. Like I went all in. All my players were expiring deals, so I have terrible keepers. My keepers are Carter Verhaeghe, Tyler Toffoli, and Jacob Trouba. It's bad. So I'm starting over. Yeah, it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be bad this year.
You're gonna be starting over for a while. Oh my god.
Oh yeah, I'm going full tank. I'm actually excited to try doing a full tank. So Dom, I was talking to, we had Dauber on last week, and I feel like this is a weird year. You can correct me if you disagree, but I feel like there's a clear 1-2 in drafts. It's McDavid, Draisaitl, but after that, I think you can make an argument for 8 different players as the number 3 overall pick. So I'm curious for you, who do you rank as number 3?
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is all those guys have different reasons to be number 3 and different reasons to not be number 3 at all. That starts with Nathan MacKinnon, who by fantasy points per game will be number 3. Will he play 75, 70 games? Who knows? Same thing with Austin Matthews, where you probably expect to bounce back towards 50 goals, towards 100 points, towards getting all these shots, but he also has those injury issues. And we also saw what his floor was last season, where there's a bit of a risk. Matthew Tkachuk is up there, but first 2 months, his top defender is going to be Gustav Forsling, and then Oliver Beckman-Larsson. It's bad. And it might be a lot harder to generate offense for the first 2 months. Power play might not be as good. He might not be 100% healthy himself after the playoffs. So he's a tough one. David Pastrnak, I mean, we know what not playing with a good center is going to look like, and it probably doesn't mean he means he doesn't get to 100 points again, but he's this transcendent talent that maybe he does. There's just risk there. So those are the options for me. I would probably go with Matthews, just for, you want to get one of your favorite players at number 3. Why not? He's there, but the choice is probably still McKinnon.
Okay, I like it. So I have my own opinions on this, but you deal with people from every fan base. Every time you put out anything, you look at the comments and it gets entertaining. So which fan base is the most insufferable?
It changes all the time, and it depends on where that fan base is more than where you are or what you're saying. If this fan base hasn't had success in a while and they're expecting it, they're going to feel a little on edge when you say anything otherwise. And I think the two big ones for me right now, because I've just felt the heat from both of them, is Vancouver and Detroit.
Sure.
I actually think Vancouver is probably going to take a step this year, but we did our player tiers project and had Quinn Hughes a little lower than some Vancouver fans wanted, and they seem to have a citywide meltdown over that, which is fine and understandable. But as someone from an NHL team messaged me afterwards, they're like, you have these two amazing players. Why is your team always getting 83 points?
Yeah.
Maybe they're not as good as you think they are, and maybe they're still great, but maybe one of them isn't quite a franchise player yet. And that's the key. It's yet. They're still young. Quinn Hughes can get there. We saw Pettersson's massive leap last year. It's okay to say, I'm not buying it just yet. I'm trying to be safe than sorry. There's still some issues. And there are just so many fantastic defensemen that maybe you'd rather take than Quinn Hughes right now. And to them, this was the most indefensible thing you could ever say about their shining beacon of hope. And if they want to be like that, they want to be like that. That is okay. Part of the point of being a fan is to be a fanatic, be a little delulu. And Canucks fans know that all too well right now. Detroit, I'm just very skeptical of the Yzer plan. I don't think they're in a good position at all. And they seem to think otherwise, and that having a non-elite core that still has all these question marks while improving and moving away from the place in the draft where you get those types of players and building through free agency is fine, then sure, if you want to believe that, have at it. I don't.
Yeah, we're with you. We were earlier on the show. We were kind of taking some shots at Detroit as well. I don't think the Yzer plan's working. For me, it's the Islanders always, because their roster construction is so stagnant. Like, their fourth line is 10 years old. Come on. So they get mad at me. I'm like, I'm sorry, you didn't, like, your team is untouched. And then the Oilers, of course, because there's this sort of obsession with Toronto from Edmonton. I don't know why. And I got heat for 1 year because in the preseason I said, like, after a game, Leon Draisaitl's body language, like during an interview, I was there, like, he was kind of dismissive, and I was like, oh, it feels like we're already in February. And then all year long was like, oh, you're a body language expert. Oh, doctor, how does his body language look today? And that was lasted for an entire season. So fair enough. That was well played, Oilers Nation. I respect it.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So Dom, we've kept you longer than we promised. So we're gonna end with this last question. We have another one that just in my notes it says Usher Super Bowl WTF. We're gonna cut that one. Go right to Taylor Swift. So okay, this is a question I've been asking just anyone who will listen. Really, I don't know why. But to me, I've been fascinated with the level of fame Taylor Swift has achieved. And I mean specifically in the last 6 months, like basically tied to the Era Tour, I forget. You'll correct me. But to me, I'm wondering if this is now the most famous, most transcendent musician since the peak of, let's say, Michael Jackson in the early 1990s. I don't know if there's any comparison. I'm curious, do you agree, yes or no, and why?
Absolutely. I feel like I heard stories that Michael Jackson couldn't go to like Lakers games because he was bigger than the Lakers game, and we saw that happen on Sunday, where she went to the Kansas City Chiefs game, and the story was her at the game and not so much the game. Obviously, they're playing the Chicago Bears, so the game didn't really matter. But you see the NFL changing their bio. You see all these brands getting in on the action. Like, she is the industry right now. She is the moment, and I don't know exactly how or why it happened, but I think the fact that she doesn't really have any competition in terms of people on the same level in pop right now, I think a lot of people have sort of fell off. Drake has fell off. The Weeknd has sort of fell off in his popularity, especially after The Idol. And there's no one new that is really taking the mantle other than Olivia Rodrigo. And I think even like it's just impossible to match what Taylor is. And I think with Folklore and Evermore, people started taking her more seriously as an artist, and then going back into her discography and seeing that this is actually like a very good songwriter. She has very good albums. It's not just what we were told to believe about this artist, that it was just this frilly music for teenage girls. And there are obviously still people who believe that, but when you go back in the work, like, it is strong work, and it is strong and consistently good work. And the pandemic helped with that, and she brings that all together with the Eras Tour, where she's performing all these songs from her entire discography. Tickets become impossible to get because there's so many new fans, and it becomes sort of this place to be, where we live in a social media culture where everyone wants to be showing off and being at the place to be. And Taylor Swift became that place, and it sort of spiraled and ballooned from there, where we have people tracking her every move and waiting outside weddings to see her, which is, I think, just insane. Because if you listen to her lyrics, she says, "Hey, I feel weird when I have crowds of people. It's scary." She has a documentary that most of them have probably seen, where she leaves her apartment and there are people like waiting outside, and she's like, "Yep, that's normal and it's scary," or whatever. And I feel bad because she obviously doesn't have a normal life anymore to this level of fame. But I mean, I think it's deserved with how strong her discography is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've nailed it. And I always think about the lyrics: "A monster on a hill, too big to hang out, slowly lurching toward your favorite city." I always thought that's what it meant, that she just she can't appear anywhere without it being a thing. And we see Travis Kelce, his jersey sale went up 400% in 24 hours. So the effect is just, it's incredible. Dom, this is awesome. Always great insights and great banter with you. We always appreciate it. And before we let you go, just tell us what you have cooking on The Athletic right now.
Right now we're going through season previews. So looking at how good every team is, plus like one big question that each team has. So relevant to what we just talked about, one of those was, is it a make or break season for the Yzer plan? And I think a lot of fans took that as, is it make or break to make the playoffs? And that's not the question. Is it make or break to show that this is a plan that is going to work? And that means getting the right players into the right positions, to showing that this plan has a future. So there are a lot of questions like that pertaining to next year and beyond, and just overall looking at the season ahead and projecting what each team will do and how good each player is, which is always fun and always good to avoid the comments during those days.
Yes, for sure. I'll be reading as I always do. Always great stuff from you, Dom. We appreciate it, and we'll see you at a Leafs game soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely, yeah. First time they play a good team, I'll be there.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Great stuff from Dom, as always. And Steven, okay, next up, we're going to talk prospects. And this is a prospect I've been really excited about since the middle of last season, when he just basically did the equivalent of just getting a star when you're playing Super Mario 3 and just started just running rampant through everything in his path. Brandt Clarke, Los Angeles Kings defenseman. I hope he makes the team. But what are your thoughts, and why do you want to talk about him today?
Well, I always want to talk about Brandt Clarke. He's one of my favorite. I really completely forgot to talk about him last week when we were talking about my favorite prospects of all time, because watching what he was able to do with the Don Mills Flyers, he had 113 points in 2018-19. Now, it was helpful that the two guys he mainly passed to were Shane Wright and Brandon Ottman. That team was just downright dominant. But when it came to Brandt Clarke, he was the one who was creating so much of that offense. So it didn't surprise me that when he went to the OHL last year, Barrie Colts, after winning the World Juniors, and put up 23 goals and 61 points in 31 games. Unbelievable how good he was. Just an unstoppable force. He was over a point per game in the World Juniors. And going back and watching his Ontario Reign games in the AHL, I thought he looked pretty competent there. So I'm a big fan of what Brandt Clarke's going to be able to do. Now, I do understand that it's going to be tough for him to make this team. Jordan Spence has the inside track right now. He's got a bit more pro experience, looks very good, is deserving of a spot up. Clarke, you can throw him in Ontario again, give him that full season, maybe give him a half season and see what happens. But to me, he's good enough to be in the NHL right now. And I think if you've got a deeper league, if you got a dynasty league and there's an opportunity to get Clarke, you're getting a guy who will be playing power play 1 minute one day, a guy who can control the game offensively. I think, there's some defensive shortcomings, but I do expect him to be able to put 50 points up a season. And you're going to be wanting to see more defensemen do that over time as guys like Cale Makar and Adam Fox continue to take over the league. But when it comes to Brandt Clarke, there's been so much hype for his offensive game for a long time. And it's not like he's just getting assists. Like, he knows how to shoot the puck. 23 goals. Yeah, you would expect that out of a guy who was, 19, 20 this year, but he wasn't an overage player, but he's putting up overage player numbers. There's a reason he's so well regarded. So I'm a huge believer in Brandt Clarke as an offensive defenseman. And, it doesn't matter what he does defensively, because those don't really matter in fantasy hockey. It matters what he does with the puck, and he does great things with the puck. So as the Kings continue to improve and hopefully become this long-term contender, Clarke is going to be a big reason why.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. I'm really excited about him as a fantasy prospect, and he's someone I'd be willing to reach for if he makes the team. And I think it is only a matter of time. Dynasty format, absolutely, go for it. For me, I wish he was a left-handed shot, because there's so much more room to grow on that depth chart. The Kings are just rammed on the right side. And even if Clarke makes the team, there's still Drew Doughty to contend with on that right side for a key offensive role, for power play 1, and so on and so on. So I hope I could envision a scenario in which they try him on the left side on a power play or something like that, because he is a threat with his shot as well. So hopefully, but either way, he's someone that bears very close monitoring because of his significant upside. Steven, let's talk best bets now, the best bet of the week. We're still in futures season, because I'm not betting on preseason games. I'm too snuffy for that. Like I said, okay, get that preseason out of here. Even though there's probably good value to be found in preseason bets, because there's more variance in terms of the results. But I digress. I'm looking at futures right now, and I've been checking out what Botano has to offer. And one that really intrigues me is the Buffalo Sabres. I think I said Sabres, but you get the idea. Sabres, plus 300 to reach 100 points this season. Every year, I talk about this every season, there is that one team that reaches the critical mass of talent and they blow through their potential. Last year, we saw it with the New Jersey Devils. They were one of the worst teams in the league, and they were a top 3 team in the league. Buffalo, I think, is knocking on the door of that explosion. They came so close last year. They missed the playoffs by a single point. They were a top 3 offense in the league. And so we know they can score like an elite team already. And I think the defensive side of the puck is going to improve. Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Samuelson, of course, they're going to keep getting better. And the goaltending should improve too, especially if Devin Levi can stick, if he's ready. So I think that the Sabres have what it takes. They're going to keep improving, and they're only 9 points away in terms of their total from last year. So can they win 4 or 5 more games? I absolutely think they can. I don't think it's out of the question they could go bananas and suddenly win the Atlantic Division, because the top of that division is starting to sag a little bit. If you look at Boston, if you look at Tampa Bay, and even the Leafs, they've changed their roster a lot, so we don't know 100% that they're as good. So there's room for Buffalo to climb. Like, they could finish as low as 7th, they could finish as high as 1st. But either way, I like them to break through, end that playoff streak at 12 years of the playoff drought, and get 100 points.
Okay. I'm not sure. Again, this is why it's more of a long shot thing, but I'm not expecting 100 points, but I'm expecting a nice improvement this year. Obviously, I think there's still going to be the teethering of the fact that there's so many young guys in here and you're having to throw them in and see what happens. You got a couple unproven goalies here, but I like this potential for this team to be a very, again, I'm so excited about this group's long-term future here. Finally, after so many years of nothing, I don't think they're going to hit 100 this year. So I'm going to say, I don't like, you know what? It's a bet worth taking because we just know that there's this boom bust potential with this group, but I'm not going to predict that they're going to hit 100. So that's it for that. I guess want to take some questions?
Yeah, let's do some questions. And if anyone's listening, we've had quite a deluge lately of questions. So if you didn't hear your one right on the air in this episode, we're still saving them all. They'll probably appear on the next episode. So keep listening, please.
All right. First question here comes from Andreas. In the 9th to 12th round, based on Yahoo ADP, do right wingers or D have a higher VOR?
Yeah, so VOR, for the uninitiated, value over replacement. So VORP as well is usually the term that's used, VORP, value over replacement player. So it's when you're trying to decide what position to target and you're trying to figure out how much value does this player have over what you could find on waivers. So, for example, someone like a Cale Makar would have an enormous value over replacement player because of the quality of defenseman you'd be able to find on waivers after a draft. He's almost like a cheat code. Connor McDavid would have the biggest value over replacement in the league. This is a really interesting question. To me, based on this juncture of the draft, so 9 to 12. So if you were in a 12-team draft, so 12th round would be up to pick 144, right? I think in this stage, right wingers have a higher value over replacement. Because to me, the defensemen right now that have really high value over replacement, that would be the early rounds, like I said, Cale Makar, someone like Erasmus Dahlin, for example. But when you get to the middle rounds, it's kind of fickle. It's like if I ask you right now, Steven, who's going to give more fantasy value this year, Seth Jones or Jacob Chychrun? It's sort of out there, right? You have a lot of defensemen in that tier, so you don't necessarily know. You might be getting, okay, I think I have a good pick in Jacob Chychrun, but then on waivers last year, you found Vince Dunn. So in that case, in this tier of the draft, the value over replacement for a defenseman wasn't actually high. You could find a Vince Dunn on waivers in most leagues, right? But right wing at this juncture of the draft, you're still just outside the top 100. It's low key, kind of a scarce position. Left wing is more common because you have a lot of the players that have dual eligibility, center and left wing. For some reason, the guys that are dual players, usually it's center and left wing, not right wing. You have more of the natural shooters on the right wing. And because of that, A, it's a scarcer position. B, you can find goal scorers at this stage of the draft. So you might be able to find someone who can bury 30, 35 goals this late, and that's going to be hard to find on the waiver wire. So right wing, I'd say at this stage, around 9 to 12, higher value over replacement.
All right. That is a very specific question. So you got to give them a shout out. A lot of the questions we get are more like wide ranging. That's a very specific one. Andre asks, Roope Hintz or Robert Thomas? Points only, no positions.
Yeah, I guess in points only, this is reasonably close. In any other format, I'm not a big Robert Thomas fan for fantasy because he's sort of a one-category player. But even in points only, I still think it's fairly easy to go Roope Hintz. He just has a lot more talent around him. And he can score more goals, so he can get points in more ways. He's not relying on his teammates to finish his chances. He had 99 points in 92 games, including the playoffs last year. So to me, I put Hintz in a higher tier overall than Robert Thomas. And I didn't really have to think too long to make that answer.
Okay, I just got a random friend request on Snapchat for the Minnesota Wild. That is really random. Okay, Guillaume asks, may I ask you who will have the biggest impact between Panarin and Kaprizov in a league where we have PP points, hits, and blocks?
Somewhere out there, my daughter's laughing at PP points.
Oh, I am too, but
yeah.
Secret.
Yeah. To me, this one's not close. It's Kaprizov by a mile. He's a superstar in his prime. He's give or take a first-round value. Artemi Panarin turns 32 in October. His scoring rate has started to decline the last couple of years, so aging is starting to take effect. His prime is ending, and he's pretty much a zero in the hits and blocks category. Kaprizov's not a beast in hits and blocks, but he's not a zero. He does a little bit more. Better score, younger, easy choice.
Yep, and he has more hair than Panarin too.
Yes.
He decided to shave his hair this summer.
Unrecognizable. I was like, who is this guy?
I truly did not recognize him at all. Shea Hobson asks, will Ryan Reeves play enough this year in Toronto to be fantasy relevant in a league with hits? I got to say, extremely uneventful first exhibition game for him.
Yeah, he's got to save those fists. He doesn't want to go full David Clarkson and get himself suspended in the preseason.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I still take credit for cursing David Clarkson. I wrote that story, Hockey News cover with the scar bleeding blue. I feel like it cursed him. So Ryan Reeves, I don't know about the playoffs, but in fantasy, we're talking regular season. So yes, he'll play plenty in the regular season. In terms of his hit rate, he has one of the highest on a per 60-minute basis. He's in the 98th percentile, so he loves to lay the body. He might only play 90 or 9 minutes a game for maybe 70 games because he's going to be a scratch here and there probably. But that would be enough to get you 200 hits. But if you're looking for offense to go with the hits, maybe 10 points, maybe 15 points, not much more. But I think you can safely expect 200 hits at least.
Look at his stats. Like, he does have the ability to put pucks in the net. He does know how to get some points, but it's always limited. But, he's not like those guys that you'd see in the 2000s that would get 300 penalty minutes and they had 1 assist and it was a secondary assist on a line change. Like, that never happened. So, all right. So we'll cap off the questions there again. Save some more. We got some great questions coming through the next couple of weeks. But it's time for starting lineup. And we're both from the Toronto area. Actually, there's so many things to do, but I have a hard time nailing down like what are the best things to do in Toronto that are not sports related. Like if someone asks me like, where should I go? What should I do? I can't give great answers. So let's hear what your answers are.
Yeah, I tried to go for a hybrid of not too touristy and not too hipstery. I wanted something between the two. So something that's, you're still doing some sightseeing, but you're not just doing all the most obvious rat racer type of sightseeing as well. So honorable mentions, CN Tower, you can climb it if you want to. The ROM is good, but I don't think it's really different from any other museum in terms of how much it stands out. Casa Loma is a pretty cool place to go, especially if you do the escape room. Those are the honorable mentions. Number 6, I have St. Lawrence Market. As far as I know, it's the largest food market of its kind indoor in the entire world. If you're a foodie, you can just find absolutely anything in there. It just goes on and on and on. Every type of food. There's really cool kind of street food you can have, like pea meal bacon sandwiches, stuff you can get for lunch, but also just to assemble stuff for a dinner, anything like that. Just to explore, just meet the people in there. It's really cool. It's very similar to Chelsea Market in New York, but it's a lot bigger. Number 5, I just have See a Show. Even if sort of Broadway musical type of performances are not your thing, Toronto, it's one of the top 3 cities in the world with New York and London in terms of the quality and the scale of show you're going to see. So if you want to go check out something, whether it's Hamilton, whether it's Wicked, whatever's playing at any given time, you're going to get top quality. You're going to get Broadway level quality if you see a show in Toronto. Number 4, Distillery District / Ghost Tour. So not just going to the distillery, but they have a really cool ghost tour there. A lot of the distillery is built on old courthouses where there used to be hangings, and there's lots of stories about ghost sightings and all that kind of stuff. So if you go in the fall, and there are obviously some great places to eat around there too, but the ghost tour is really fun, kind of spooky. Number 3, Ripley's Aquarium. So this one is more of an obvious tourist place, but it is really fun. I think what really makes it stand out is they have a ceiling that is basically part of the aquarium. So because of that, you have sharks swimming right over your head. And they have multiple sharks in there, and just the experience is really cool. And they do it with a conveyor belt, so you don't have to worry about not getting a good look at the sharks. They keep people moving, but not too fast. So when you get to the shark area, you stand on this like human conveyor belt, and it moves you at a good pace, but not too fast either. So it'll take like 20 minutes, and you get a good look at the sharks, but people aren't hogging the experience as well. So it's a really fun place to go check out lots of different aquatic life. Number 2, just if you're a foodie, if you want real good food and not like tourist trap type of food, like you don't want to go to a place like Scadaboosh outside the Rogers Center, I recommend just going to Ossington Street. Ossington, from Queen to, let's say, Dundas. There are just so many good independent restaurants there, every type of food you can imagine. There are cool places to go out, like clubs and stuff. They're not like more just like, I don't know what the word would be, hipstery vibe, but more places where you can go and dance and hear kind of older school music as well, but mainly just the eating experience. You just can't miss. Like every step you take, you'll hit an amazing restaurant there. And number one is the Toronto International Film Festival. Of course, it was weird this year because of the strike, but the TIFF experience is really amazing. You can get a pass and go and see a whole bunch of different movies, and you will get exposure to movies that you never would have discovered otherwise. It's a really fun experience, especially if you do the multi-movie pass. It's something that's very uniquely Toronto as well, and it comes every year. So those would be my top 6 things to do in Toronto that don't involve sports.
I have not done a good majority of those, but the Ripley's Aquarium I really recommend. And Distillery District, you got to go at Christmas time. That's when it's like really cool. That's when it's at its best. I lived in Queens Quay, right by the water, right by Scotiabank Arena, and I always said, "Oh, I'll go to the Toronto Island one day." I lived there for 3.5 years, never went once.
Toronto, yeah, that was one that I almost put on the list as well. It's pretty cool taking the ferry across, but kind of once you're there, you're like, all right, cool. There isn't that much to do there, but it's still it's fun to do for a day.
When I looked up like what the biggest things to do there, number 1 was nudist beach. I'm like, all right, that's kind of weird.
Yes, that's there. And there's rumors that there's a baseball park there where like Babe Ruth hit his first pro home run. I think that's where they built the nudist beach.
Okay. Yeah. All right, that's it.
All right, well, that's a good one, Stephen. Good starting lineup. Hopefully we've helped someone who's planning a trip to Toronto. It's a fun time of year to go, especially with the Blue Jays, maybe in the playoffs. That's it for this week's episode. Next week, we're going to continue the draft prep, and I think it's going to be a special episode where we're going to be going through some rankings with some other fantasy experts and doing some little battles about our ranking discrepancies. Should be a lot of fun, and we will see you then, everybody.